But anyway, again, my name is Dennis Carril. I'm the fire ecologist on the Santa Fe National Forest, and today I'm going to talk about managing smoke and fire on a landscape scale. Vic did a really good job with the case study on his particular forest, and I'm going to kind of zoom out and talk about the Santa Fe in general and some of the different management strategies we have and apply to what's going on there in the Santa Fe. For anyone who's familiar with the Santa Fe National Forest knows that we have seen our fair share of fire, especially in the last few years. To reiterate some of the things that were talked about this morning, I heard it from a few different folks, and one thing, it's kind of the premise of all of what we're dealing here with this at this workshop is that fire and smoke are inevitable on our landscapes. Fire is a process that is inevitable, and we are not going to get rid of it. We have all the ingredients here for it to happen: fuel, conducive weather conditions on a yearly basis, and unlimited sources of ignitions between lightning and humans. All those ingredients combined, it's not a matter of if a fire is going to happen, it's a matter of when that fire is going to happen, and more importantly, what kind of fire is it going to be when it does happen? Is it going to be that lost conscious type fire at the height of fire season where it's burning very uncharacteristically, say like in Ponderosa pine, or is it going to be one of these management scenarios where we're going to be doing good for the resource, like a resource benefit type fire? And what we're aimed to do, I talked a little bit about forest health there, is balancing the forest health with human health. And when I talk about human health, I'm not only talking about the communities that are impacted by either prescribed fire, or managed fire, or wildfire, but also the firefighters who are on the line and the length of exposure they have in dealing with the smoke and the impacts to them as well. Very important part of it. Okay, so first, everybody's kind of danced around this issue. We talked a little bit about it, but I'm going to put some clear definitions up and talk about first the definitions of what wildland fire is. We have wildfire, we only have two kinds. We have wildfire and we have prescribed fire. Wildfires are unplanned ignitions and prescribed fires are planned ignitions. And now a little more specifically, talking about what our management options are, we have three, folks. We have three simple options. We can suppress fires, we can put them out, which is dealing with unplanned ignitions. We can manage them for multiple objectives or to the benefit of the resource, also unplanned ignitions, or we can pick the time and we can pick the place and we can put prescribed fire in the ground. This is all we have. These are the three options. Now it's important to note that suppression and multiple objective or resource benefit kind of overlap and can be the same thing. To where on one fire, like a lot of what Vic was talking about, you know, they were suppressing it on one end, and part of the objectives, I'm sure, were suppressing it and keeping it out of neighborhoods and off private land, to whereas they were encouraging it in other places on that landscape where it was going to do some benefit to the resource. So again, important to note, there is some meshing and blending between resource benefit and suppression. You can't have both on one fire. Okay, so now what I want to do, this is a pretty cool slide. I want to talk about starting out with some fire history on the Santa Fe going back to the 1970s. And we're going to just basically focus on fire footprint acres, and we're going to go by decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on, up until the last 4 years, from 2010 to 2014. We see there in yellow, that yellow blob by Los Alamos. Let me get my laser pointer here. Los Alamos this here, the La Mesa fire, I believe it was 1977. 1980s, it's showing up, but you're not seeing anything. It was a very wet decade, not much fire in the landscape there. Getting into the 1990s, the 1990s, we start to pick up the Oso fire and the Dome fire, happened in the 90s, and just looking at footprint size, exponentially increasing as we go through the decades. The 1990s, we see the Escape fire, the Cerro Grande here, the Vivash fire over in the Pecos. We're starting to see these footprints getting bigger and bigger. Now, just in the last 4 years, from 2010 to 2014, fires across the Santa Fe and adjacent land ownerships. Of course, we have the Las Conchas fire, Thompson Ridge fire, Pacheco fire, Jaroso fire, South Fork fire. The list goes on and on and on. And the point I want to make here with this slide is that we're seeing an exponential growth in fire size and the amount of acres burned. And of course, this is correlated with the drought we have been in for over the last decades, 14, 16 years, whatever it's been. But you can see here, as this data shows, we're already on par just in the last 4 years to more than double what we did in the 2000s. And this is just on the Santa Fe. Pretty incredible data there. Now, what I want to do, same map, but now I'm going to break it down by our different management options, looking at wildfires, resource benefit acres, and prescribed fire acres, and just to kind of do a comparison amongst the three different things we have. Now, all of these showing up here, and this is just on the administrative boundary within the Santa Fe National Forest. What we're showing now is wildfire acres. And even suppression wildfires can have some good benefits, as well as human-caused, lightning-caused, whatever. But as I animate it here, you're going to see some of the areas turn a different color. Now, these were naturally ignited wildfires where we went out. They were started by lightning. We went out, did an assessment, and these were benefit to the resource. And we claimed, and we looked at them as such, a resource benefit fire. So now just seeing, we go from wildfire to resource benefit fire to now prescribed fire. And the footprints get increasingly smaller is the point I'm trying to make. Meaning that wildfire acres, if you combine prescribed fire and resource benefit fire acres, and this is, I'm sorry, I meant to say, this is just looking at the last 4 years, 2010 to 14. If you combine prescribed fire resource benefit acres, it's only about half of what we're burning with wildfire acres. And it's important to note that with wildfires, some of that, again, that's not bad fire, but still quite a bit of it, what we're seeing in the wildfire acres burn, is uncharacteristic and it's not beneficial to our resource. So just trying to illustrate the point here about our different management options and our different outcomes and the amount of acres burned. Okay, so now it's time. We looked at acreage, a little bit of fire history. Time to talk about cost. Las Conchas fire, $800 to $1,400 per acre. Pretty darn expensive for a fire like that, in which a lot of cases in that fire was very uncharacteristic in the ponderosa pine, and it was not a good effect for the resource. It was not a benefit to the resource in a lot of cases of the Las Conchas. Whereas the next example is a multiple objective fire or a resource benefit fire that just recently we managed on the Santa Fe, the Pino fire, for 4,300 acres. And the full cost was about $742,000, which is pretty expensive for a resource benefit fire. Worked out to about $170 per acre. Still a fraction of the cost of what we're looking at for certain suppression fires. And it's important to note that the Pino, it was a complex chunk of ground. I was IC4 for about a week and a half on that thing. This thing went for 3 weeks. We transitioned to a Type 3 team, brought in a helicopter, so it was a relatively on the high side as far as resource benefit fires. Also important to note on the district there, Bill King and his folks, they've done also other multiple objective or resource benefit fires under a Type 4 organization where they had the cost down to $15 an acre, $25 an acre, and they were, it was a lot more smaller organization, Lex Compress Fire, but just to make the point that you can really drive the cost down with resource benefit fire. And then, of course, prescribed fire, generally speaking, ranging from $50 to $100. And again, that's strictly for implementation. That doesn't account for any of the planning that goes into prescribed fire, the NEPA and such. But it's also important to note, complexity increases, that cost may go up. Complexity decreases, you don't need as many resources, that cost could go down. But still, our options, multiple objective prescribe, much lower than what we're paying for full-on suppression fires that are typically doing not very good for the resource. So now we talked about acres burned, we talked about cost per acre. Now it's time to look at some smoke data and some air quality data. Here is a chart showing the EPA's air quality index for particle matter 2.5. That's been mentioned a little bit today. Folks are getting familiar with what that term means and what that 24-hour average means. It's basically samples taken hourly throughout the day. You average it out to 24 hours. And the EPA standard is 35 micrograms per cubic meter, which was mentioned earlier. And anything above that is starting to get deemed unhealthy for certain groups, certain individuals. And anything below that, the EPA is okay with. So now what I want to do again is go through each of the different management options and give some examples of smoke data associated with each. Now, the gentleman from the city of Albuquerque, I think he was with the meteorology department, said there was not exceedances during the Wallow fire of 2011. Well, I was like, wait a minute. I was hearing him say that. I was like, wait a second. Josh Hall gave me this data, who is our smoke liaison with the Forest Service. I had a conversation with him just before I came up here, and what's going on there apparently is the EPA has their own smoke monitor set up in Albuquerque, whereas there's multiple smoke monitors set up in Albuquerque, And the data that was pulled from this were from 3 different data collectors, and I think there were 4 service monitors. Simply put, it was different from what the gentleman from the city of Albuquerque was reading, meaning that there was exceedances for the air quality standard in regard to the wall of fire. And important things to recall here, or let me explain the graph here real quick. On the y-axis, we have smoke concentrations of the PM 2.5 size, and then across the bottom, it's just a run of dates pretty much. It's the month of June there. And you can see that there was about 7 days there from 200 miles away from wall of fire to Albuquerque, we were getting exceedances. 7 days about, and that's 200 miles away. The point here being that, again, it's been talked about, wildfires are much longer duration. We don't have much say or control. We're at the mercy of the weather and how these things burn and how long they go. And there's very widespread impacts. We're 200 miles away, 7 days of exceedance. That's pretty impressive as far as smoke impacts go. And then you have to consider there's a lot of towns between Springerville and Albuquerque. There's a lot of areas, a much larger area getting impacted. Okay, next we have some very fresh data from the Pinot fire. Again, same chart. We have the PM 2.5 concentration levels on the y-axis, about the whole month of September across the x-axis. And the difference here is this monitor was set up in Ponderosa, New Mexico, which is directly down drainage of where the Pinot fire was. About 6 miles down drainage, right down Vallecitos Creek, and it empties into the little community of Ponderosa. So you can see they had impacts. They were significantly impacted. And Dorotea was there as our information officer. We were ahead of the game big time on this fire with public information, getting the word out. And sure enough, we did have impacts. And but comparatively to a wildfire like the Wallow, which went on for days and days, still very close. We have about 5 days of exceedance here and some lesser impacts throughout the month. So conclusions to draw, variable duration, but you can guarantee a fire like this close to a community, down drainage, you're going to have significant impacts and they're going to be localized. Albuquerque did get smoke from that, and I don't recall what the data said in Albuquerque, but I really wanted to focus on how close this particular fire was to the community of Ponderosa. And third and lastly, here's a prescribed fire. And this was the Chaparral prescribed fire of 2012. This one was about 1,500 or so acres in size. Same thing, PM 2.5 concentrations on the Y, and late October through early November here. And points to be made, we're about 60 miles away, and this data was collected in Bernalillo, New Mexico. This is Chaparral unit was up in the Jemez Mountains near the Girl Scout Ranch, up from Gilman Tunnels, if anybody's familiar with that area. And you're about 60 miles away from Bernalillo where this data was collected. And you have a much shorter duration. You did have impacts, but there are a lot lower concentrations compared to the different ones I just showed between a wildfire like the Wallow or a managed fire like the Pinot. And like Armstrong, my boss said earlier today, talking about it, this is intuitive. Wallow fire was 500,000 acres. Pinot fire was 4,000 acres, and this was about 1,500 acres. So less acres burned means less smoke. That's pretty intuitive, right? And if we really want to get to where we want to get to, we are going to have smoke impacts. And that's kind of drawing some conclusions here. I don't care what type of management we have, there are going to be smoke impacts. Whether it's prescribed, resource benefit, or wildfires. But it is important to note that wildfires gone unchecked and burning at the height of fire season, they can impact a large area and they can do it for a really long time. So that's an important distinction between some of our other wildfires and some of our other management options. And really important to communicate that communities right down drainage that are very close to these, they are going to get impacted and most likely significantly. I don't care if it's, I was just getting smoke calls just last week from a pile burn that we did in Los Griegos. They got impacted for about up to a week, and they are right next to where we were burning these piles. So where these communities are placed has a lot to do with how much you're going to get impacted. So we kind of went through, we talked about acres, footprint size, talked about the different management options, talked about the different costs, and looked at the different smoke outputs for all of them. You see, I'm trying to tie all this stuff together and draw some conclusions from it. So what can we do in face of all this? I've heard it talked about again this morning quite a bit amongst the group. Education and outreach. Not only for like what Dorotea does with fire information when it's actually going and going out there and telling people the smoke is coming and what we're doing and conveying that message, but on a much larger scale, like what we talked about happens in the Southeast, and how much they burn and how well the public accepts it. Us as an agency, we can do much better on outreaching and explaining, telling our message, telling our story, why we're out there doing the things we're doing. And when I say develop a fire culture, what I mean by that is, it's like it happens in Florida. Folks understand why they're burning. They know why they see smoke, and they understand the benefits of it. And what we'd like to see here is, instead of folks saying, "Why are you burning? What's going on up there?" I'd like to hear folks saying, "Hey, why aren't you burning today? Today's a good burn day." Or at least driving down the highway and seeing smoke up on the mountain and knowing exactly what we're up to and why we're doing it. And then prescribed fire training. Again, I mentioned the Southeast. It's the only place in the United States that I'm aware of, besides the Nature Conservancy and some of the training exchange programs that they do. The Prescribed Fire Training Center is the only place in the United States. It's very unique. Why can't we do this and expand it and go other places? If we understand the cost per acres and some of the things we're talking about, why can't we ramp up our prescribed fire training? Now I'm going to throw one out that's going to, some of our managers are going to be like, scratch their head. I don't know if they'll like this or not, but I've talked about it with a lot of my colleagues, and you know what? We use IMTs, incident management teams, for wildfire response really well. We're really good at it. We can assemble a team of folks and go deal with a wildfire and put that sucker out, no problem. Why can't we do something like this for prescribed fire? Take a smaller organization, maybe a short team or a type 3 organization, have a district or forest be able to host them with NEPA in place, project ready, everything prepped, and have a team come in and help do a large landscape burn efficiently with the right amount of people. It might drive the cost per acre up a little bit, but you can achieve a lot at once, and if you have logistics, if you have finance, and you can take the pressure off a burn boss, man, you're going to be much more efficient at your job and raise the acres on prescribed fire. And again, of course, like what Bill says, are we going to, is the public going to accept that? We're going to have to cross that bridge when we come to it, but it's certainly something to consider. And again, this gets personal with me. Dorothea was at the public meeting with me in Ponderosa a few weeks ago, and I know we can't provide hotel vouchers. I know people would abuse the system. I know all of those things, but we have to think about some sort of relief option, whether it's the Red Cross for folks that are being impacted that have serious health issues, and we are impacting them. Now, at the community meeting in Ponderosa, one thing that stuck in my head was, because we were talking about the Pinot fire, that we just managed that, and they had smoke off and on for a month, and then we were at that meeting to talk about doing the Paliza, right next to it, another 6,000 acre burn first entry. These people understand the logic of what we're doing. They're supporting us, and they support us until they don't support us, meaning that these folks were just tired of smoke. They just wanted us to go somewhere else. They understood why we were doing it and everything else, but it just really got me thinking about, hey, you know, some sort of option for these people that have chronic respiratory problems, some sort of option. It needs to be considered, needs to be talked about. And one of these things, it's like, well, I've already talked with Bill King and the guys there at Haymes, hey, maybe let's get Paliza done and then give that area a rest for a while. Let's go to the West Mesas, let's go somewhere else on the district to where we're out in the back 40, or maybe we're impacting a different community, but let's give Ponderosa a break. So just considering rotating through areas. And then, of course, we have limited funding, and it's important to, where do we put our limited funding? Well, we got to prioritize areas for treatments, and typically we're focusing on watersheds and around the wildland-urban interface, or communities, right? And so that's a good transition to talk about. Well, in 2009, Congress, what was it, the CFLRP Act of 2009, basically acknowledging the fact that our postage stamp-sized treatments that we've done all through the past are not effective, especially in the face of the fires we're seeing these days, and meaning that we need to approach things on more of a landscape level. And if we want to effectively do some worthwhile treatments, we got to go bigger. So the Southwest Haymes project is one of the projects that were awarded under that act of Congress, and we're almost have the EIS signed to do this thing. It's the same act as 4FRI is under. And basically we have 110,000 acres on the forest that we're analyzing. The EIS is due to be signed hopefully by this spring. And in our analysis we found that about 70,000 acres are treatable with fuels treatments being prescribed fire. You're talking about your dry mix, conifer, ponderosa pine, that frequent fire return stuff where we can go in there and do some good and try to at least take away some of that uncharacteristic fire. Now, again, potential fuels treatment, 71,000 acres, And the red I just popped up there is prescribed fire and resource benefit fires that we have managed and implemented from 2009 to 2014, 5 years. So 18,000 acres, that's about 25% of that area in 5 years. Now, knowing that the return interval in ponderosa pine is on average 7 years, and if you look at 70,000 acres, we'd have to be burning in this project area about 10,000 acres a year. And like what Bill Armstrong said earlier, if we wanted to do it forest-wide, we have to be doing about 60,000 acres per year. So it's a little daunting. Are we ever going to get there? Very doubtful. But important to know and cool to see that we are making some good strides, and we are breaking up the landscape. We are reintroducing that process. Are we ever going to get to where we want to be? I don't know. We'll see. Probably not, but it doesn't mean we don't try. Okay, so your take-home message: fire and smoke are inevitable, and if everybody can agree on that, we just have to look at the different management strategies and how they fit in and what we can do. And we do have just those three options: suppressing, resource benefit, and prescribe. That's all we have. And the overall idea is managing and looking at these different options and balancing the health of the forest with the health of the communities and the health of the firefighters, the ones that are out there exposed to it. With that, that's all I have. I'll take any questions.